Thank you so much. This open. I don't have a second screen today, so please forgive my slovenliness here. Oh, great. Talk about learning how to screw it up. So thank you everybody for coming and joining us today. I'm very proud to be here, very proud to be a two-time greener and to see Evergreen continue to expand to provide opportunities to the student. I feel very blessed to have been an Evergreen student 2 times. Evergreen is revolutionary, and while I was a student, I was committed to Evergreen's continual survival. So very appreciative to be here and to be provided this opportunity. As mentioned before, my organization is Lilith Moon Farm Agricultural Organization. We are based legally out of Eastern Washington, and we empower farmers in rural communities throughout Washington state. So we're not just an Eastern Washington organization. So I'm Melinda Lupe Johnson. I hail from the tribes from all over the nation, from the Yaqui and New Pascua Yaqui in Arizona, the Cherokee Nation, and also Huron-Wyandot Nation in Canada. So I wanted to have an informal survey. If you can raise your hand, who knows what a food system is? I was laughing because it looked like somebody changed their mind. So we have quite a few people. We have 6 people who have raised their hand to say that they know what a food system is. And I will bring this up a little bit later, and hopefully this will be informative for everybody. So that was our introduction of short formal surveys. I'm going to go through some definitions here, an overview of my organizational structure, our current pursuits and programming, what our 5-year strategic plan includes as objectives, and then my perspective on entrepreneurship, what we're doing in the future. And closing, I was going to do a poll everywhere, but I don't know if we'll have time for that. So we'll see how that goes when we get there. So the food system has been defined generally as an aggregate of food-related activities in the environments, which includes political, socioeconomic, and natural activities within which these activities occur. And that was from 2011. That was the best definition that I could find. And I've highlighted political because what was surprising to me coming into this field was just how political it can be. So in the chat, if you know what food systems are, why don't you type in the chat what you think the components of a food system would be. We'll just take 2 minutes to do that. You can also, if you are unable to access the chat because you're on a cell phone, please feel free to raise your hand or just to speak out loud. So it looks like we have restaurants, farms, producers, people, labor, consumers, food, grocery stores. Those are all great answers. Distributors and logistics, food systems, farmers, distributors, all of these good things. Procurement, consumer, grocers, laborers. Very awesome. Thank you for participating in that. Yes. So here is Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations, which could be considered probably the premier authority on food systems. And there is a lot of information in one graphic here. So you see everything that we had listed in the chat and more. including natural elements, air and soils, ecosystems and genetics, water and climate, social cultural norms, which we talked about a little bit earlier. And then somebody mentioned policies, laws, and regulations, which is one of the focuses of my organization. So coming to my organization, we were founded in 2010, and like every true Evergreener trying to buck the system, we're not officially registered with the Secretary of State till 2021. We're run for farmers by farmers, for the rural poor by the rural poor. Although my life financially has greatly improved since my time at Evergreen, with the addition of the degrees and being hired also to the State Department of Agriculture and all of those things that education can bring you into privilege, I am still in my head, in my neural structure, one of the rural poor. We offer scientific services, including laboratory services, milk testing, soil testing, and advisories on those things, education, food assistance, and technical assistance services for food systems. So if somebody, say, is having a grant problem, having a hard time getting a hold of paperwork, having a hard time navigating the Federal Register, we will help them to figure out what to do next. So we have 3 people currently on our executive team. The most important, and will probably sound strange to everyone here, is Lindsay Lindback, who is our Community Relations Director. Lindsay is the foundation and hub of our organization. She is the leader. We all follow what she says. And then we have Nils Johnson, who is a principal food systems engineer who looks at the entire system of what we're doing. We have 3 organizations that come together to form one organization. And he is the mastermind behind what we should do next, what we should look to, what kind of grants and funding we should pursue, and how things are structured. And then finally, there's me. I'm the principal investigator and the executive director. So I run any research projects that we have going on, help with the research grant composition, and then act as the center of operations. I probably really should be called officer of operations or something like that. But on paperwork, I'm currently the executive director. So this confusing thing is kind of the center of our entrepreneurship. We have linked 3 organizations together to become one coalition organization. The first is Lilith Moon Farm Agricultural Organization, which I'm presenting under today. That focuses on the elements of food systems, farmer assistance, public food education, and political action. And Whizbang Research LLC was formed about the same time as Lilith Moon Farm, and that is focused on research parts, technology development, systems development, and everybody goes into grant funding and programming and research. That's the cornerstone of our fiscal structure. And then finally, the newest addition is Lilith Moon Ag Org, so it's kind of a reflector, and that is has been formed as a social purpose corporation. And that includes developing Eastern Washington DHIA, which is the Dairy Herd Improvement Association, which provides farmers with feedback and laboratory services for their milking animals. Eastern Washington Tilth, which focuses on organic certification, state-funded contract research, and laboratory service. And I'll discuss a little bit later about how these things come together to solidify into the organization and why we do things like this. So the mission of Lilith Moon Farm is to provide the reduction of poverty and restoration of dignity for the citizens of Washington through reasonable implementation of sustainable and reasonable agricultural practices. This is a high climb, and I'm not sure how much realization in the entire state there is regarding this. So politically, we push. We're all very outspoken in the organization, and we try to be as many places as possible because we do believe in our mission. So our current pursuits and programming include establishing food assistance in very rural Eastern Washington. And I should have put together a map, and I realize that now, but these are in the Colville Reservation areas of Inchelum and Keller, where there is incredible food insecurity, high levels of poverty, and also high levels of trauma, multi-generational and racial trauma that is pretty much unmatched anywhere else in the state. We are also working on Eastern Washington Dairy Herd Improvement Association, which will be opening next year in March. And that is part of National DHIA, and we test for diseases, butterfat, proteins, all of those numbers that dairy farmers need to move their product. Eastern Washington Tilth is being worked on right now. We're expecting certifier confirmation in September of this year. We've already gotten through 2 of the 3 needful steps to become certified through the USDA. And we're looking to provide free certification for all farmers operating under $200,000 of total gross revenue within the last fiscal year, and to maintain that free certification until they're up and over, if they decide to, $1 million level. And then we're also looking at food safety training, culturally accessible food safety training, which is an undertaking that's never happened before. And then we're looking for the development of inventory and invoicing software for food assistance and also for small farmers. That's a lot of information. So I give you a breather for a second and see, is there any questions about that? Awesome. Did I hear someone? Go ahead.
I was just wondering about what the culturally accessible part meant in the food safety training in this context.
Oh, sure. So we're developing a program that can be utilized by any group of people. One of the things that we noticed early on in discussing food safety is that we had rural farmers in Stevens County who had a hard time accessing the language that was provided in national food safety training programs. So produce safety, for instance, which comes out of Cornell University. And so we have 4 principles. There's the reduction of technical language. There is hands-on training. There is narrative scaffolding. So things like that. And then you can switch those things around depending on who you are talking to. So for instance, if we were on the Colville Reservation, which we often are, providing a food safety class for canning, we'd use a traditional food of Camas. If we were doing produce safety training in regular Stevens County, not on the reservation, we would use some type of, before what we've done is we put green fluorescent protein producing bacteria onto lettuce, and we'd use a black light and have that hands-on demonstration. So it's basically an adjustable food safety training for no matter where you are, whatever situation that you're in, but also focusing on how people really access information. I've been through the Produce Safety Alliance training 3 or 4 times, and it is just not accessible. There's too much technical language. A lot of people look like a total deer in the headlights at the end. So we just wanted to make that more accessible in general. Was there a question in the chat page? I saw a chat come up. Okay. Just wanted to make sure. Thank you for that question. Much appreciated. And so here we're at the 5-year strategic plan. So our objectives are the restoration of the agriculturally dead areas in Northeast Washington. A lot of those dead areas are because of agreements made at the federal level in the late 70s that put people out of business because they bottomed out the local trade prices. Return dignity to the small and beginning farmer in Washington. I have been a small farmer in Washington, and that experience brings me to this work. There is not a lot of accessibility to funding when you're just beginning, and pretty much you have to be from the privileged classes to get up and running as a farmer anymore, unless you come from multi-generational, but again, that's privilege. And so it is a goal, it is our objective to return that dignity to the small and beginning farmer in Washington state. Improve nutrition and economy in very remote communities in Washington state. This comes off of our principles of decentralizing food, so things grown at a local level, and for deregulation. Regulation is part of the reason that we have such trouble with getting small and beginning farmers off of the ground. There's a lot of inspections, there's a lot of costs to licensures, and we want to push by decentralizing and deregulating. And we believe that that will improve nutrition and local commerce, but that is yet to be seen if it comes to fruition. We also want a political system that understands the needs of both rural communities and small agricultural operations in Washington state. I have been very lucky to communicate with local representatives, and they seem to very much understand what's going on. However, communicating with representatives that are not in my area, not in Region 7, seems to be somewhat of a challenge. There are some communication barriers there, some understanding there that either need to be demonstrated in person by taking people out on tours of the area, or by making sure that I have language that is accessible to them as well and explaining it from that standpoint. Another objective is improved and affordable laboratory and tech services for impoverished and beginning farmers, food system organization, and other food systems components. Testing is very expensive. And yes, the people who currently do it are extensively are well-heeled, and they have been in the business for a long time. One example of that is the milk testing. A lot of farmers are strapped to the Dairy Gold lab testing facility as a result. One of the biggest problems is they're not getting those results until 2 weeks later after the milk has already shipped. So that's part of it. And then the last thing is what I was talking about, deregulation and decentralized food systems for true anti-racist and resilience principles. We've been talking a lot about resilience in the state, and I think also at a national level, if USDA's funding is any indication of that. But we are doing that here at a local level. And so our perspective of agricultural entrepreneurship is a holistic system approach. All of those nodes in the local food system is what we focus on, which is a lot. It is a lot. It's processing, it's farming, it's harvest, equipment, laboratory services, and also, food assistance, which is something that people who are in the technical world don't often get into. Diversification and incorporation of the different business models. That's what I showed you earlier, the 3 different entities. As far as funding goes, whether you're applying for state funding, federal funding, business funding, in order to have a productive food system, you have to have a local organization that has all 3 of those different business models within them, because they synergistically feed one another. For instance, there are many loans I can get as an SPC that I cannot access as a 501c3. There are many opportunities for the LLC that can't be utilized by the other 2 entities. And another thing is to focus on the needs of the community. I had my ideas at first when I started this, and then it became apparent that there were different needs in the community, and that to be successful, I had to roll back on those needs that I had, and focus on what was apparent. And then we focus on anti-racist, anti-dominant culture, decentralization, and deregulation principles, as I talked about earlier. So that is our perspective of agricultural entrepreneurship. There has been one other entity in Montana who has a commercial kitchen that has used this model with a lot of success. There is another commercial kitchen in Walla Walla who has to be under constant support from, I think it's the port there, and they still struggle to get by. So this is our vision for the future. We believe in a Washington that's healthy, robust, and continually considers the needs of its rural citizens in balance with urban citizens. This consideration includes dignity of those struggling under the weight of poverty and those who are bravely attempting to work the land. We believe that the cornerstones of this vision includes addressing the needs of the individual through direct assistance, so food assistance, education assistance, social assistance, energy assistance, education, and providing affordable services with compassion. So I was going to bring up a poll everywhere. How are we doing for time?
We're good.
Okay. So I will stop sharing and open up the poll everywhere. How's everybody doing? That was a lot of information. It's like drinking from a fire hose, kind of. What questions do you have? So
There's a question in the chat I can read to you, if that's okay.
sure.
I was wondering if you could elaborate on the deregulation aspect. I understand that these regulatory systems can be exclusionary and oppressive, but also I'm so used to regulation being a good thing for food safety. It would be great to hear more about what this means in this context.
Yeah, that's a great question. I could probably get into it pretty deep. I'll try to keep it succinct. One of the instances of that is there's more focus on regulation than education. And what I would really like to see is the Department of Agriculture look at providing more education than punitive regulation. And that education and regulation is backed up by science. One instance of this is raw milk. Raw milk has a notorious reputation of being unwholesome and dirty and disease-inducing. But one of the realities is that we haven't had TB in the state for over 30 years, probably closer to 40, maybe 50 years now. I'd have to check the dates. When I was first at Evergreen, it was about 40 years, so probably 50 years. And all of the other associated diseases, brucellosis, and all of these different diseases that there are massive amounts of testing for, no testing centers to do that, and no education behind what to look for, or that you even need to test your animals. If education was set up in a better way, we could have deregulation, and we could have some more independence, and we could break through those fiscal barriers that are keeping people from achieving what they want to do, farming. Dairy is only one instance. There's very few with produce, and that's one of the reasons that we see a lot of disease coming from produce, is because there's not the regulation, but there's also not the education that people need to get. I hope that answers the question. Does that answer the question?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. So let's see. I'm seeing you mentioned you had an idea of community needs when you came to this position, but that changed when you saw the needs emerging. Can you elaborate on that? Oh, yes, most definitely. When I started on this, I intended to be education and laboratory services only. What I learned as coming through this is that food assistance and processing is almost as important. Food assistance for people who need ongoing emergency food, but also processing and commercial kitchens and their non-availability would also impact the need for farmers to want to produce. If you can't get it to market, if you can't sell it, and for food assistance, if you can't repackage it in a community or in a commercial kitchen, then you're going to have a hard time. So there was additional services that were needful, and so that's how my position changed, and that's how my opinions changed on how this all needed to be structured, because I came from a science background. And so I was like, oh yeah, laboratory services. And that was my hyper focus. And so that's basically the story of, and that's only come up in the last couple of years, to be completely explicit. And upon getting a really good look at the counties through my current day job, I was able to understand that a lot better. And talk more about why LMFAO decided to have a nonprofit LLC and SPC. Talk about the process behind this and which came first. So the nonprofit came first, and that was developed back in 2010, even though we weren't registered with the Secretary of State. We were registered with the IRS, which doesn't make any sense, but we weren't making any money anyways. And we decided to have all of these because of the different ways that things can be funded. LLCs and SPCs have different funding available to them. Nonprofits definitely have a different amount of funding available to them. Also, the fiscal responsibility to the nonprofit can be derived from LLCs and SPCs. So the money-making entity, the SPC, can loan money to the nonprofit and make it work that way. It's very hard to get nonprofit funding, especially when you're first starting up. The competition is high, or the expectations are high. Federal funds, for instance, any large amount of money expects you to have 3 years of lower level funding from the federal government or from the state level, and that prevents a lot of forward movement in any quick capacity whatsoever. I hope that I've answered that with the why the LLC versus the SPC. SPCs are social purpose corporations, so they tend to be a little bit more flexible. There doesn't have to be a proof of benefit um, to their investors, I guess you could say. And the LLC is just an individual LLC registered to one of our executive board. What am I most proud of? I'm proud to even be here. When I started at Evergreen, I lived in the Ohop Valley in Eatonville with my 10 little goats. I had Nigerian dwarfs. And Evergreen gave me the opportunity to experience education and organization just like no other place. So even though I'm currently in process of getting a master's degree in microbiology from Colorado State University, I'll always be the most proud of my Evergreen degrees, where I was given a chance that I thought I would never have. And then I was able to move on and help my community and help make the world a better place. Another question was, how do you see this specific farming model working to symbiotically with wildlife, specifically buffalo herds? And how can it empower indigenous nations to food sovereignty? That's a really good question. One of the things that was recently accomplished and other projects like it will be accomplished in the future was that NILS went out to Inchalum, which is on the east side of the Colville Reservation, and built a meat cutting facility for people to butcher their deer kills, their elk, but also their farm animals for consumption. And there is a relationship that he has very carefully built there to advise people on how to do so in a safe manner. And that is one instance of where continuing to empower indigenous nations by acting in a manner of service. Like, we are there to serve the Colville Reservation and their people to the best of our ability, but also to express needs and wants, and also help with anything else. I mean, there has even been talk of starting internet cafes on the Colville Reservation, which it does not have internet service whatsoever, by using Starlink and making sure that people have access to anything that is they want to do. Speak more to the problems of dairy farmers, what they're facing, and their future work with DHIA. So, dairy farmers are in a state of emergency. A lot of this is because there's a lot of converging factors. The first is, of course, ecology and how cows are seen as influencing climate change greatly. There is the competition with a whole new set of nut milk, soy milk, non-dairy products, under the premise that their product is unhealthy. My hope is, with my organization, is to work with national DHIA, but also local entities to protect the future of the Columbia River. And what I mean by that is that California agriculture is coming to Washington State. And there are facts of the matter that are very important to highlight. Almond milk is incredibly water consumptive. The estimation is that water consumption by an almond tree, they need 1 gallon to produce 1 almond. and that would be devastating to the river. And so there's been some recent legislative work about, you know, making sure that people can have access to raw milk, and the education and the farmers for producing raw milk can be well educated. But on the opposition, you have Dairy Farmers of Washington, Big Ag Dairy, who promotes the confinement dairies. But working with them to understand, if we don't work together, dairy farming is not only going to disappear in Washington state, but that we're going to have a lot of problems with water in the future. And to, you know, backside collaborate with that. DHIA is testing. DHIA is education, and it's a community within itself. We do have Washington DHIA in Burlington. They are continually strapped for time and strapped for cash, and trying to run it under an LLC. So we hope to alleviate some of that pressure and work with them to get everybody the service that they need, and to build a community of testing supervisors in Eastern Washington and Western Idaho probably as well. What skill do I use most in my career? Use my powers of persuasion. As you can tell, I have a lot of persuasive talents. Not really. I think the skill that I use most is multitasking. And where I learned that level of multitasking was by a program at Evergreen called Molecule to Organism. I had a child. I had a teenage child. I had a household to run. And then I had 60 hours committed to working on Molecule to Organism. So that is the most, that is the best, that's the most prolific part of my career. Can I talk more about LMFAO's work around anti-racism? We have a anti-racism policy in place. We work to deconstruct. We work to deconstruct systems while building our own system. I know that sounds crazy, but we do work with Tilth Alliance on anti-racism training. Tilth Alliance is a big, powerful organization in Seattle that is supposed to focus on farmers and statewide sustainable and organic practices. And so we do a lot of consulting, mostly consulting work. In our area, where we're at, it's kind of a quagmire at right now, but we are working to punch through those walls of racism where we're at by hiring and training who we see fit, by bringing people with different ideals into the area. What advice do I have for current Evergreen students? Don't ever give up. And also, don't ever assimilate. Don't ever assimilate. Be the proverbial greener for the rest of your life. It might seem hard at times. It might be stressful at times. But really, while you're at Evergreen, soak up all of the cultural principles of Evergreen and keep fighting, and don't ever assimilate to the dominant culture. And study hard, do your homework, talk to your professors. They're all great. They're all great people. What is a future product that I'm most excited for? I'm excited for our new location. We have preliminarily obtained a building outside of Hunter Springdale Road. It's a former WSU lab. It has 2 fully outfitted labs. It has a space for processing, a space for food assistance, and office space. And I'm really looking forward to get that up off the ground, but only only second to that is offering food assistance in Inchelum and Keller. If anybody here ever wants to go out to the Colville Reservation to visit with me, I would be happy to take you along. It's not really something that can be explained here. I can't really explain the towns of Northport, Onion Creek, Republic, and all of those different areas to you over this. But it is an area that has needs that are extensive, and the state is not really working to address them, not in a holistic manner, not in a manner that preserves the dignity of the people who are here. But if I had to narrow it down to one project, it would probably be food assistance in Inchelum and Keller. So I saw something pop up in the chat.
That was me just putting your email in the chat.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, and so here's the website. It's under construction still. And my email, Nils' email, and Lindsay's email. Please reach out to us. I mean, I am serious. I am happy to host any greener who is curious about this area. As this organization continues to develop, I will be focusing on trying to convince Evergreeners to relocate to bring that evergreen energy to this area. And I really appreciate all of your time today, and I will hang out for any more questions that anybody has.
Awesome. Thanks, Melinda. I know I have a million questions, so I submitted a couple other questions in the poll. I think if you scroll up, hopefully they've come through.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Is there any recent legislation work that we should be keeping our eye on in relation to this work? Yes. Representative Joel Kretz put in a bill for he calls it the Frontier Bill, and it's in an effort to get Wi-Fi out here and cell service and fiber optic. But it has language in there that will definitely help agricultural communities move forward. There's the organic bill that's coming through through Tilth Alliance and their supporters. But those are about the only ones this year. But in the future, look forward to a raw milk bill and look forward to a they call it Freedom for Food bill, which will deregulate some labeling for off-farm sales. And I see what are the best ways as we as consumers can help support rural farmers. Go find your local farmers. Find your local farmers, and then when you go out on vacation, find your local farmers there too. It is a bit of a jaunt to support your rural farmers, but off-farm sales are best because everybody's taking their cut in the middle. So that's what I could say. Off-farm sales are best. And you have my email, so if you need any direction on where to go in your area, I probably know your local farmers.
Awesome. Are there any other questions that folks have? All right, let's give a moment to thank our guest. Melinda, thank you so much for joining us today. This was fantastic. It's always one of my favorite topics is when we have guest lectures to talk about food and food systems. So thank you so much for joining us today. Folks who are in my class, please hang out here. We're going to take about a 10-minute break. For those who are not in the class associated with this guest lecture series, we look forward to seeing you next week.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your time, everybody. It was great to see everybody here. And Omni Extaris.